Welcome back to Building Better Reading Skills for IELTS.
Yeah.
Today we're going to do a deep dive into a real IELTS reading passage.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a great way to practice and really kind of flex those reading comprehension muscles. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're going to be focusing on the Gobridge Tramlink. We'll be taking a look at some frequently asked questions about its services. This is a pretty common format in the IELTS reading section, so it's a good one to practice.
Yeah, definitely. So how we're going to do this is we're going to take turns reading each paragraph of the passage, and we'll make sure to explain any vocabulary that might be new to you.
Right.
And then once we've gone through the entire passage, we'll move on to the questions and really unpack the answers together. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So why don't we start with the first paragraph? All right, here it is. Gobridge Tramlink operates a network of trams that run throughout the year and provide links to main services, stations, and the airport. Timetables are reviewed in October and March and may alter slightly, so check before you travel. Our first tram from the city center leaves from Marvin Square at 6:30 a.m., half an hour after the first city bus service.
Okay, so right off the bat, we have that phrase, main services.
Right.
In this context, that probably means major transportation hubs or key destinations within the city.
Exactly. Think of it like the main train stations, bus terminals, or even popular attractions that you might need to connect to.
Right.
And just a reminder, it's important to note that the timetables can change, so always double check before you head out. All right, moving on to paragraph 2. Would you mind reading this one?
Sure. Trams from the airport to the city center start running at 6:15 a.m. and leave every 15 minutes until 7:30 p.m. and the evening schedule takes over. Trams then run to the main railway station at 35-minute intervals and end at 11:35 p.m. If your flight arrives later than this, the number 207 airport bus runs every hour through the night.
Okay, so this paragraph is giving us some more specific details about the tram schedule from the airport to the city center. And notice how it says evening schedule takes over.
Yeah.
This is suggesting that there's a shift in the frequency, meaning the trams might run less often,
Yeah.
and there might even be a change in the routes.
Precisely. And it's interesting that they mentioned the number 207 airport bus. It seems like that's an alternative if you arrive later in the evening.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if maybe the bus service has a different route or schedule than the tram, perhaps covering areas the tram doesn't reach during those late hours.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see what paragraph 3 has to say.
Tickets are not sold by anyone on the tram. Ticket vending machines are located at all tram shelters. Check your route and make sure you buy the correct price ticket. If the vending machine does not work, you should push the red button on the machine and speak into the microphone. A member of staff will either fix the machine straight away or contact the tram inspector on board your tram. He or she cannot sell you a ticket, but you will not be obliged to pay the £8 onboard fine for not having one.
Okay, so they've got a pretty clear system for ticketing.
Yeah.
You can't buy tickets on board, you have to use the vending machines
Right.
at the tram shelters.
Yeah.
And it's good that they've also thought about what to do if the machine isn't working.
Right. And also, did you notice that phrase, correct price ticket?
Yeah.
This is subtle but important. It tells us that the fare isn't fixed. It probably varies depending on how far you're going or the specific zones you're traveling through.
Good catch. Okay, let's take a look at paragraph 4, the final one.
All right. Each tram is licensed to carry a maximum of 2 bicycles, though drivers may refuse to allow cyclists to get on if the tram is crowded. Bicycles may only be taken on the trams during off-peak travel periods, up to 7:30 a.m., between 10 a.m. and 2:30 p.m., and after 7 p.m., festivals and other large events may also mean that bicycles are prohibited as trams carry extra passengers at these times. Once on board, riders should remain with their bicycles throughout the journey and ensure they do not obstruct the entrance, exit, or any other area of public access.
Okay, so this paragraph is all about bringing bicycles on board. And notice how they use the term off-peak travel periods to describe times when the trams are less crowded.
Right.
And they even give a specific time frames when bikes are allowed.
Yeah, and it seems like they prioritize passenger flow and safety, which makes sense.
Right.
Cyclists need to stay with their bikes and make sure they're not blocking anything, entrances, exits, or other public areas.
Right. Okay, so now that we've carefully read and analyzed each paragraph, let's move on to the questions. Are you ready to put our understanding into the test?
Let's do it.
Okay, question 1. It reads, the city buses start operating later than the trams. Now, let's think back to the passage. Where did we see information about this?
I think it was the first paragraph. Do you remember which line?
Yeah, it states, our first tram from the city center leaves from Marvin Square at 6:30 a.m., half an hour after the first city bus service.
Right.
So if the first tram leaves at 6:30, and that's half an hour after the first bus service.
Then the city buses must start operating before the trams.
Exactly. So the answer to question 1 is false. The city buses actually start running earlier than the trams.
And this is a good example of how the IELTS can be tricky with the wording. You have to pay close attention to those small details and the relationships between the keywords.
Absolutely. Now, let's move on to question 2. We'd like to read this one.
Yeah. Question 2 states, you can get a tram from the airport to the city center up to midnight.
Okay, so for this one, we need to remember what the passage said about the airport tram schedule. I think this information was in paragraph 2.
Yeah, you're right. Paragraph 2 states that trams from the airport to the city center run until 11:35 p.m., after which the number 207 bus service takes over.
That's right. So even though the bus service keeps running throughout the night, the trams specifically do not run up to midnight.
Exactly. So the statement, you can get a tram from the airport to the city center up to midnight, is false. The trams stop running before midnight, and the bus service is the only option after 11:35 p.m.
All right, great. Let's move on to question 3.
Question 3 asks, the 207 bus service stops at the main railway station.
Okay, now this is where we need to be extra careful and only use information that's actually in the passage.
Right. Well, the passage does mention the 207 bus as an alternative for those arriving after the tram service ends. It doesn't explicitly say whether this bus stops at the main railway station or not.
Exactly. We can't just assume anything.
Right. Since the passage doesn't give us this information, the answer to question 3 is not given. We just don't have enough evidence to know for sure whether this statement is true or false. It's important to remember the difference between what you might infer and what the text actually says.
Okay, great. Let's pause here for now. We've worked through the first 3 questions, and I hope you're starting to see just how important it is to really analyze both the passage and the questions carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll tackle the remaining questions in part 2, and we'll continue to discuss how to approach these types of tasks in the IELTS reading section. Welcome back to our deep dive into IELTS reading.
So we just finished going over the first 3 questions of our Gobridge Tramlink passage.
Yeah.
You ready to keep going?
Absolutely. Let's jump into the next question.
Okay, so question 4 says, the cost of a tram ticket varies depending on your journey.
Okay.
So if we think back to the passage, there was a clue in paragraph 3 about this. Do you remember?
Yeah, it said, check your route and make sure you buy the correct price ticket.
Right. And that phrase, correct price ticket, implies that the fare depends on something.
Exactly. It's telling us there isn't just one price for all tram journeys. It probably varies depending on how far you're traveling or maybe the specific route you're taking.
Right. So based on this, we could say that the statement, the cost of a tram ticket varies depending on your journey, is true.
Yes, definitely.
All right, on to question 5. Bicycles are allowed on the trams between 7:30 a.m. and 10 a.m. What do you think?
Okay, well, for this one, we need to remember the rules about bicycles on trams. That was in paragraph 4.
Right. Paragraph 4 stated that bicycles are allowed, but only during off-peak travel periods.
Exactly, and it even gave us specific time frames for those off-peak periods.
Yeah, it said up to 7:30 a.m., between 10 a.m. and 2:30 p.m., and after 7 p.m.
Right.
So the time period that they mentioned in this question between 7:30 a.m. and 10 a.m. is actually not one of those times.
It's not an off-peak travel time, so that means bicycles wouldn't be allowed on the trams then.
Right, so the statement is false. All right, let's move on to question 6. Do you want to read this one?
Sure. Question 6 is, additional trams run during the Gobridge Festival period.
Okay. Now, I remember the passage mentioned festivals when it was talking about the bicycles.
Yeah, it said, festivals and other large events may also mean that bicycles are prohibited as trams carry extra passengers at these times.
Right, but it only mentioned how this affects bicycles, not if they change how often the trams run during festivals.
Exactly. The passage doesn't explicitly state whether or not there are more trams running during festivals.
Yeah, it only says that the trams that are already running might be carrying more passengers because of the festival.
Right.
So we can't see for sure one way or another.
Nope. So the answer to question 6 is not given.
All right, last but not least, question 7.
Okay. It says, cyclists may be asked to leave the tram if they block the exit.
Okay, let's go back to paragraph 4 again to answer this one. Paragraph 4 said that cyclists should remain with their bicycles throughout the journey and ensure they do not obstruct the entrance, exit, or any other area of public access.
Right.
So it's saying that cyclists need to make sure they don't block any areas of the tram.
But it doesn't actually say if they would be asked to leave the tram if they did block an exit.
Yeah, it doesn't mention any specific consequences.
Right. It just says they shouldn't block the exit. So again, we can't say yes or no based on the information given.
Exactly. So the answer to question 7 is not given.
All right, so we've now gone through all 7 questions from this Gobridge Tramlink passage.
And we really took our time with each question to make sure we were understanding the information correctly and not making any assumptions.
Yeah, and this is the approach you want to take in the real IELTS reading section, too.
It's all about being very thorough and careful.
Now I think this is a good place to stop for now.
Sounds good.
When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about this question type and also share a helpful tip that you can use in the reading section. Welcome back. So we've been talking about the Gobridge Tramlink and working through some practice questions.
Right. It's all about getting you more familiar with this type of reading passage and how to approach those IELTS questions.
Exactly. And in this deep dive, we've been focusing on true, false, not given questions.
Yeah, and these can be tricky because you have to really understand what the passage is saying and all those little details.
Right. It's not enough to just look for keywords. You have to think about the meaning of the whole sentence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's just take a minute to recap some of the important things we've talked about today.
Yeah.
First things first, you really want to read that passage carefully.
Yeah, don't rush through it.
Pay attention to the details and how the ideas connect.
And look out for any qualifying language,
Yeah.
like those little words and phrases that change the meaning of the sentence.
Yeah, good point. And then once you've read the passage, you want to analyze each question carefully. Figure out what the key words are and really understand what the question is asking you.
Right. And once you know what you're looking for, you can go back to the passage and find the relevant information.
Exactly. And here's the thing. You can't make any assumptions.
Right.
Stick to what the passage actually says. If the information isn't there or doesn't directly say it, then the answer's not given.
And don't be afraid to go back and reread parts of the passage if you need to.
Yeah, sometimes you got to do that.
So we've covered a lot, but ultimately the key is to practice.
Right. The more you practice with different IELTS reading passages and questions, the better you'll get at it.
Yeah. And there's tons of resources out there that can help you prepare. Practice tests, study guides, online resources. It's all out there.
And don't forget about just reading in English in general.
Yeah.
The more you read, the more comfortable you'll get with different writing styles, vocabulary, all of that.
Now, before we wrap up, we would love to hear from you.
Right. Tell us about your experiences with IELTS reading practice. What are you struggling with?
Yeah. Or what strategies have been helpful for you?
Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're all in this together, and your insights might really help someone else out.
Absolutely. And remember, keep practicing, stay focused. You got this. We're here to help.
Until next time, happy reading.